They say history is written by the victors with black ink on white pages, but some stories, some grand epics, are not written in ink. They are carved into crystal with blood, tears, and life itself. You may know of the prophets who parted the seas or the kings who conquered the world, but have you ever heard of a hero who transformed a deadly desert into a bridge of salvation? A man who proved that the greatest sacrifice is, in fact, the most glorious victory. This is not the story you were taught in school. This is a legacy that has been buried by the dust of ages. And today, right here on our channel, we will blow that dust away. We promise you the end of this saga will make you redefine the very meaning of the word hero. But before we pierce the veil of time, let's pause for just a moment. Let us know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Drop a comment so we know that no matter the distance, we are all embarking on this journey together. Now take a deep breath. Let your mind become still. Our story begins. In a forgotten land where the sun scorched the earth and the wind carried the moans of stone, there existed the Valerion Empire. This was not an empire of gold or silk. It was an empire of shadow and cold magnificence, built entirely from basalt as black as a starless night and obsidian glass that glittered like dead stars. Emperor Vorlag, who ruled with an iron fist and a frozen heart, saw this cruel splendor as the ultimate symbol of his absolute power. Every structure, from the sky-piercing towers to the pathways beneath his feet, had to reflect his suffocating greatness. And to forge this deadly beauty, hands were needed, tens of thousands of them. These were the hands of the Ash-born people. Once a free tribe living in harmony with the desert, they were now nothing more than ghosts, their backs bent under the yoke of slavery. Every day, they were forced into deep, dark, and suffocating mines, facing constant danger to quarry every slab of stone, every shard of obsidian for another's glory. The air was thick with rock dust, the sharp clang of pickaxes against the earth mingling with dry coughs and desperate sighs. They were the builders of another's paradise, but lived in a hell of their own making. Among this despairing crowd, there was a man named Kaelen. He was not like the others. Kaelen was no hidden prince, no secret warrior. He was the son of a family with a legacy that was both a privilege and a curse, the line of the liaisons. For generations, his family had been the only ones permitted to speak with the Valerian authorities, to relay the emperor's commands and report on the state of the slaves. They were the fragile bridge between the rulers and the ruled. For this reason, Kaelen lived in a state of perpetual torment. To the Valerians, he was merely a talking tool, a slave slightly more elevated than the rest. But to his own Ash-born people, he was an object of suspicion. Their eyes always held a cold distance, an unspoken question. Whose side are you on? They saw him entering and leaving the palace, saw him speaking with the very guards who beat them. They could not see the pain in his eyes, only the shadow of potential betrayal. He was isolated between two worlds, truly belonging to neither. Every word he spoke to the authorities felt like a knife to his conscience, and every suspicious glance from his people was a weight that crushed his soul. He loved his people with a silent love, yet he was bound by his ancestors' legacy of cooperation. He was a prisoner of his own role, bearing invisible shackles far heavier than any iron chains. And then the fateful day arrived, a day when the last thin thread of endurance finally snapped. Under the desert's fiery sun, Kaelen was overseeing a new construction site where the Ashborn were attempting to transport enormous blocks of obsidian. He saw a sight that had become all too familiar, a Valerian guard, massive and brutish, screaming at a child. It was a scrawny boy with large, bewildered eyes, who, out of sheer exhaustion, had accidentally let a small stone slip and shatter. Just one stone. But in the guard's eyes, it was an act of defiance. He brandished his leather whip and lashed it mercilessly against the boy's small, bare back. A line of blood appeared. A sob was choked back. The crowd of slaves around them just bowed their heads, their hearts clenching, but no one dared to speak. That was the rule. Silence was the only way to survive. But on that day, something inside Kaelen's chest did not just fray, it shattered. It was not his patience, it was his resignation. The fire of indignation he had suppressed for so many years erupted, incinerating all fear, all calculation. He did not charge in to kill the guard. Violence was not his answer. Instead, he moved as swift as a shadow and stood in front of the child. His own back took the full force of the next lash. A searing, burning pain tore through his skin, but it was nothing compared to the agony in his heart. The guard was stunned. The crowd of slaves lifted their heads in astonishment. For the first time, someone had dared to challenge them. Kaelen turned, his eyes no longer holding hesitation, only a cold, burning flame. He looked directly at the guard and spoke, his voice not loud, but clear and sharp enough for all to hear. He used his unique authority as a liaison. The Emperor's rule is to punish laziness, not to murder children for an accident. You have overstepped your authority. It was an act of suicide. The guard, humiliated before the crowd, roared and, with other soldiers, rushed him. They beat him without mercy until he collapsed onto the hot sand. But even as he fell, his gaze remained unbroken. They did not kill him. Death would have been too easy. Emperor Vorlag, upon hearing the news, issued a far crueler punishment. He ordered Kaelen to be exiled to the Dead Desert, a desolate wasteland where the sand was as white as bone and not a single drop of water, not a single living creature could survive. It was a slow and agonizing death sentence. Thrown out of the city gates, Kaelen staggered forward. Around him was nothing but an endless, silent sea of sand. He walked, aimless, until exhaustion finally overcame him and he collapsed. The sky blurred, his consciousness fading into darkness. He thought of his people, of the child he had tried to protect, of his own powerlessness. He closed his eyes, ready to embrace death. But fate had other plans for him. In a delirium between life and death, a vision appeared. He saw no heaven or hell. He saw himself standing beneath a colossal tree. A tree with no leaves, its branches gnarled and skeletal, reaching for the sky. But it was not dead. Its trunk was not wood, but stone, petrified over thousands of years, yet it still radiated a warm, living energy. It was the ancient spirit of the land, the soul of the desert, embodied in an eternal petrified tree. A voice echoed in his mind, not in sound, but in feeling, a voice as ancient as time itself. You shed blood not for hatred, but for love. You accepted death not in despair, but for protection. Your heart is still pure. This desert is not your grave, it is your crucible. A small branch, dry but as hard as steel, fell right beside Kaelen. The voice spoke again. Take it. It is a part of me. Return, not as a slave, but as a storm. Free your people. Show them that even from ashes a great fire can rise. When Kaelen awoke, the sun had set. The thirst and the wounds remained, but in his chest was a new strength. Beside him lay the petrified wooden staff. He picked it up, feeling a strange connection. He was no longer Kaelen, the outcast liaison. He had died in the desert and been reborn with a mission. He turned, his fiery gaze fixed on the distant black towers of Valerion. He was going back. Kaelen's return caused a shockwave, even greater than his exile. He did not sneak in, did not hide. He walked straight through the main gate, his wooden staff in hand, his clothes in tatters, but his posture proud. The guards, who had once mocked him, now recoiled from the intensity in his eyes. Something about him had changed, an aura that commanded respect and fear. The news reached Emperor Vorlag. He laughed, a scornful, dismissive sound. A slave survived the dead desert? What a farce. He ordered his guards to seize Kaelen and bring him to the Obsidian Hall so he could personally put an end to this joke. The Obsidian Hall was the heart of the Valerian Empire. The floor was paved with slabs of basalt so black and polished they served as mirrors, reflecting hundreds of colossal pillars carved from solid obsidian. The only light came from torches, but instead of warmth, the light was devoured by the hall's blackness, creating a space that was cold, imposing, and suffocating. Vorlag sat upon a throne carved from the largest obsidian block, looking like a god of shadow judging the world. When Kaelen entered, the contrast could not have been more stark. A thin man in ragged clothes holding a simple wooden staff, facing all the majesty and power of an empire. But Kaelen did not flinch. He walked with a steady gait, the sound of his staff tapping on the stone floor, creating dry, solitary clicks that defied the hall's authoritative silence. He stopped in the center of the hall, raised his head, and looked directly at Vorlag. "I have returned," Kaelen said, his voice echoing. Vorlag sneered. "To die again, desert rat?" Standing beside the throne was a figure in a dark robe. It was Malachor, the high priest and Vorlag's most trusted advisor. His face was hidden in shadow, but his eyes were sharp as daggers, observing Kaelen with a cold curiosity. He spoke in a soft voice like honey laced with venom. "Your Majesty, perhaps the desert gods took pity on his foolishness, but that pity ends here." Malachor was an enigma. No one knew where he came from, only that he had appeared years ago with wise prophecies and cunning strategies, quickly earning Vorlag's trust. But there was a secret only he knew. Malachor was also an Ashborn. He had watched his parents die in the mines, and from that day on, he swore he would never be weak. He renounced his origins, trampled on his past, and used his intelligence to climb to the pinnacle of power. His goal was not to serve Vorlag. His goal was to destroy everything, both the oppressive Valerian Empire and the Ashborn people he deemed weak. He wanted to stand on the ashes of both, the sole master of a new order. Kaelen's appearance was both a threat and a perfect opportunity for his plan. Kaelen ignored Malachor. He spoke to Vorlag. "I did not come to beg. I came to deliver a message from the very land you trample. Free my people. Let them go." The entire hall held its breath, then erupted in the mocking laughter of the nobles. Vorlag laughed too, a choked, incredulous sound. "Free them, those worms? And who do you think you are, a prophet?" "I am the voice of the silent," Kaelen replied, his tone still calm. And the final warning. As Vorlag's laughter died down, he signaled to the guards, "Kill him." But as the guards advanced, Kaelen raised his staff. He did not attack. He simply struck the base of the staff hard against the stone floor 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. Instantly, a strange change occurred. Not an earthquake, not a thunderclap. A silence descended. The torches still burned, but they no longer crackled. The whispers of the nobles died. The footfalls of the guards became soundless. The entire Obsidian Hall, and then the entire capital city of Valerion, fell into an absolute suffocating silence, a muteness more oppressive than any scream. Those accustomed to a life of luxury and noise suddenly found themselves trapped in a prison of silence. They began to panic, screaming in vain, but not a single sound escaped their throats. That was the first plague, the plague of silence. Vorlag looked around in terror. He tried to roar, but only air escaped. He looked at Kaelen, and for the first time, a flicker of fear appeared in his eyes. Malachor stepped forward, whispering into Vorlag's ear, his voice somehow piercing the wall of silence. "This is dark magic, Your Majesty. A desert trick. He is trying to frighten you. Do not give him what he wants. Show him your resolve." Vorlag, reassured by Malachor's words, nodded angrily. He motioned for the guards to continue, but Kaelen had already turned and was walking away. The silence followed him, and only when he stepped out of the city gates did sound return to Valerion, leaving behind a profound sense of dread. The next day, Kaelen returned, and another plague fell. The Zafira River, the Empire's lifeblood, the source of water for its magnificent hanging gardens, suddenly stopped flowing. The clear blue water vanished, replaced by a dry, burning torrent of sand that flowed ceaselessly, filling the canals and turning lush green fields into an extension of the desert. The second plague, the River of Sand. The people of Valerion began to panic. Drinking water ran out. The plants withered. Malachor whispered to Vorlag again, "He is attacking our foundations, Your Majesty. This proves the Ashborn are a menace. We must increase the pressure, force them to hand over this sorcerer." Vorlag listened. He ordered the workload of the Ashborn to be doubled, and their meager food rations to be cut. He believed that cruelty would crush this rebellion, but he was wrong. The third plague was even more terrifying. A dust storm arose, but it was not ordinary sand. It was obsidian dust, microscopic, razor-sharp shards of volcanic glass that hung in the air. It got into the eyes, causing temporary blindness. It entered the lungs, causing people to cough up blood. The entire empire was shrouded in a deadly, glittering black fog. The Valerian nobles, who took such pride in their appearance, now had to cover their faces, coughing violently and living in darkness. Meanwhile, in the slave quarters of the Ashborn, a miracle occurred. Though they lived in the heart of the storm, not a single speck of dust entered their homes. The air remained clear. They realized this was not sorcery. This was the intervention of a higher power, and Kaelen was its messenger. Hope, long extinguished, began to smolder once more in their weary hearts. After 3 plagues, the Valerian economy was in ruins. The people were terrified. The army's morale began to waver. Vorlag sat on his throne for the first time, feeling his power slipping away. He looked to Malachor, searching for an answer. Malachor bowed his head. "He has gone too far, Your Majesty. There is only one way to end this. One final strike, not against him, but against what he loves most. Give the order that on the next full moon, every firstborn child of the Ashborn will be executed. He will have to choose. Surrender himself or watch the future of his people be extinguished." It was a diabolical plan, a double-edged sword that Malachor had carefully calculated. If Kaelen surrendered, their hero would fall. If Kaelen did nothing, the Ashborn's faith in him would shatter. Either way, Malachor would win. Vorlag, in his desperation and wounded pride, agreed. The order was given. A dark shadow of death fell over the homes of the Ashborn. That night, Kaelen did not go to the palace. He stood on a high hill, looking down at the city of Valerion, shrouded in its dusty fog. He could hear the weeping of his people, feel their terror. He looked up at the sky, his heart breaking. He prayed to the ancient spirit, not for himself, but for the innocent. "Why them?" he whispered. "Take my life, take everything I have, but please, spare them." And the ancient spirit answered, not with a voice, but with a sudden, searing understanding that flashed through Kaelen's mind. A terrible and magnificent truth. To break the chains, one must first break the symbol of the chains. The price of freedom required the ultimate sacrifice, not of blood, but of pride. The night of shattered souls had arrived, the night of the full moon. The sky was eerily clear after days of dust storms. In the homes of the Ashborn, mothers held their children tight, tears streaming down their faces. In the palace, Vorlag sat on his throne, waiting for news of Kaelen's surrender. But Kaelen did not come. At the stroke of midnight, as the moon reached its zenith, a strange vibration began to emanate from the hill where Kaelen stood. It was not an earthquake that shook the ground, but a supernatural frequency, a resonance that could only be felt by the soul. And then it happened. A sound began as small as a crack in glass, then grew louder and louder into a deafening chorus of fragmentation. Crack, crack, shatter. Every piece of obsidian glass in the Valerian Empire, the symbol of its power, its wealth, its oppression, simultaneously shattered. From the massive windows of the palace, the intricate decorative statues, the luxurious dinnerware, to the gemstone on Vorlag's crown, everything exploded into millions of glittering black shards. The great castle, his pride, was in an instant rendered naked and ugly, its rough basalt skeleton exposed to the moonlight. The glory of Valerion was undone. Vorlag stared at his hands in disbelief. The power ring on his finger was now just an empty metal frame. His pride, his confidence, everything that had defined him, had turned to dust along with the obsidian. He slumped onto his throne, no longer an emperor, but simply a broken man. The wailing that filled the capital that night was not from the Ashborn, but from the Valerians themselves, who had witnessed the symbol of their empire crumble in the blink of an eye. This was the point of no return. Vorlag was defeated. He knew it. He called to his guards, his voice hoarse. "Let them go. Let them all go." A new dawn broke, illuminating an unprecedented sight. The gates to the slave quarters were thrown open. Tens of thousands of Ashborn, still in a state of shock, stepped out into the light, no longer as slaves, but as a free people. Kaelen stood there, waiting for them. Tears streamed down his face, but they were tears of joy. The great rescue had begun. They gathered into a colossal procession, a nation on its way back home. They had nothing but the clothes on their backs and hope in their hearts. But that was all they needed. The great exodus began. But freedom is never cheap. After the Ashborn had journeyed for several days, they arrived before a seemingly impassable natural barrier, the Silent Chasm, a canyon hundreds of feet deep, its bottom a deadly expanse of quicksand. And from behind them, the sound of war horns echoed. A cloud of dust rose to the sky. The Valerian army, led by Vorlag and Malachor themselves, was in pursuit. Vorlag's wounded pride would not let him rest. Malachor had poured honeyed words of humiliation into his ear, of reclaiming his honor. "We cannot let them leave so easily," Malachor had said. "They must pay for the chaos they have caused." The Ashborn people looked at the chasm before them, then at the army charging toward them from behind. They were trapped. Panic seized them. The short-lived joy of freedom turned to abject terror. They turned on Kaelen, their words of thanks turning to accusations. "Did you lead us here to die? It was better to be a slave in Valerion than to be buried in this chasm." Kaelen's heart felt as if it were being squeezed in a vice. He looked at the desperate faces of his people, then toward the approaching enemy. He closed his eyes, once more connecting with the ancient spirit, and the answer came again, clear and agonizing. There was a way, but its price was everything he had. The ancient spirit revealed to Kaelen that to make the quicksand in the Silent Chasm solid, a supernatural catalyst was needed. The petrified staff in his hand could do it, but it needed to be infused with a pure, living energy source. He would have to channel his own life force into the staff, transforming his very being into the energy that would create the bridge. He would save everyone, but he would pay with his own existence. There was no hesitation, not a moment's doubt. A strange peace settled over Kaelen. He had found his ultimate purpose. He turned to face his people, and this time he smiled. A genuine, warm smile that defied all fear. "Trust me," he said, his voice rising above the howling wind of the chasm. "Your freedom is worth more than any single life, including my own. Be ready, the path is about to open." Then he turned his back to them, facing the Silent Chasm. He raised the wooden staff high into the air. He plunged the staff hard into the ground at the very edge of the chasm. The moment the staff hit the earth, a blinding light erupted. From the point of contact, crystalline veins began to spread across the ground, like roots of pure light. They shot forward, out over the open air of the chasm. Where they passed, the quicksand below began to crystallize, hardening and transforming. a glittering, translucent bridge impossibly beautiful began to form, spanning the deadly gorge. It was a miracle, a sight that left both the Ashborn and the charging Valerian army stunned into silence. But every miracle has its price. At the same time the bridge was forming, Kaelen's own body began to transform. From his feet, rooted to the ground, his flesh began to turn into transparent crystal. The transformation spread upward through his torso to his arms. He could feel his life force draining away, flowing into the bridge. The physical pain was absolute, but his mind was strangely serene. He remained standing, as firm as a statue, his eyes fixed forward, toward the promised land. He did not look back, but he could hear the sound of his people's footsteps beginning to run across the bridge, their cheers mingling with their sobs. They were getting to safety. The last of the Ashborn, a little girl, glanced back as she ran. She saw their hero slowly turning into a glittering crystal statue under the sun, and she cried out. When the last of the Ashborn was safely across, the Valerian army, led by Vorlag and Malachor, began to storm onto the crystal bridge. Vorlag roared, determined to annihilate those who had humiliated him. It was at that moment that the new twist of the story was revealed. As Vorlag charged forward, Malachor, who was right behind him, suddenly drew a hidden dagger from his robe and plunged it into his emperor's back. Vorlag collapsed, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared at the man he had trusted most. Malachor smirked, the smile of a victor. He had eliminated Vorlag, and the Ashborn would be next. He would be the only one left, the master of a new empire. But he had not counted on the will of Kaelen. From within the crystal statue, Kaelen, with the last flicker of his consciousness, focused his remaining life force into one final act. He, now a part of the bridge, commanded it. The crystal bridge began to tremble violently. Then, with a sound that split the heavens, it shattered into a billion glittering fragments, falling like a shower of diamonds. The entire Valerian army, along with the dying Emperor Vorlag and the horrified traitor Malachor, were plunged into the quicksand chasm below. On the other side of the chasm, silence fell. The Ashborn were safe. They watched in breathless awe at the final magnificent sacrifice of their hero. The bridge was gone, the enemy was destroyed, but the one who had saved them was also gone. Tears streamed down their faces, but this time there were no accusations, only infinite respect and gratitude. They did not rush to move on. Instead, they walked along the edge of the chasm, carefully collecting the larger fragments of the crystal bridge, pieces that still glittered and felt strangely warm. And then they found it. Among the thousands of shards was a single perfect piece of crystal, shaped like a human heart, still pulsing gently with a soft light from within. It was Kaelen's heart, unbroken, still whole. They wrapped it in the finest cloth they had and carried it with them as their most sacred treasure. Many years passed. From the ashes of a slave's past, a new society arose. The Ashborn found a fertile oasis, a promised land of their own. They built new cities, not of dark basalt, but of ivory sandstone and fragrant wood. They were no longer called the Ashborn. They called themselves the Crystal Kin, to forever remember the price of their freedom and the legacy of the one who led them. Their society was built on the principles for which Kaelen had lived and died: justice, love, and sacrifice for the community. And in the very center of their largest city, in a great plaza, they built a monument. Atop that monument, they placed the crystal heart of Kaelen. It was not a dead relic. It continued to radiate a warm, gentle light day and night, illuminating the entire city. It became the moral compass for all future generations of the Crystal Kin. Whenever a great decision had to be made, whenever a dispute arose, they would look to the crystal heart and ask themselves, what would Kaelen do? It reminded them that sacrificial leadership was not about domination, but about service. That true strength lay not in the power you hold over others, but in your ability to lift others up. And that true freedom was not just about breaking chains, but about building a world where no one has to wear chains again. The story of Kaelen was not a tragedy of punishment or a sad ending. It had become an epic of choice, of boundless love. He did not get to enter the promised land with his people because in a far grander way, he became the path to it. His crystal legacy would live on forever, not just in stories, but in the very lives and hearts of every member of the Crystal Kin. An immortal legacy built on a love stronger than stone and clearer than crystal. Kaelen's sacrifice proved an eternal truth. The greatest hero is not the one who wins every battle, but the one who is willing to become the bridge for others to cross. His crystal legacy is not just the story of a nation's rescue, but the most profound lesson in sacrificial leadership, the kind of power that can turn a desert into a promised land, and ashes into a brilliant future. So we ask you this one final question. If you had to choose, would you take the absolute but empty power of Emperor Vorlag or the profound sacrifice and immortal legacy of Kaelen? What hero in your life has inspired you with their own sacrifice? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If epics like this, stories that can touch the soul and make us reflect on true values are what you seek, then be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Because history is filled with forgotten legacies, and we will uncover them all together. Thank you for listening.